Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Jake, a growth hacking internet swarm, and welcome to Swarm Salons, weekly talks where we gather talented founders and fractional tech builders to meet like minded people, discover possibilities for collaborations, and find new pathways. Swarm is a social network for fractional talent, connecting builders and tech workers to opportunities and support they need. Tonight's Swarm Salon is architecting your tech stack, it's a bit of a tongue twister, as a fractional CTO. So, tonight's speaker, Aaron, will be having a conversation with our Chief Design Officer, Alexis, while we accept questions from the audience. So, if you have any questions during their talk, feel free to send them in the chat and we'll make sure to get them. So, Aaron and Alexis, are you there?
Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Hey guys.
All right. So, to introduce tonight's speaker, Aaron is an engineer, co founder, and CTO at Swarm. He spends most of his time architecting and working with the other engineers on the Swarm platform. His stated primary goal is to enable, not to limit, others through technology. He has also held prior positions such as lead infrastructure engineer at Samsung and head of engineering at Kalibrr. So let me hand the mic over to Aaron and Alexis. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you for handing the floor. Okay, Aaron. So this is going to be fun. We're going to be talking about your life.
My life.
Yes. So you're a CTO of Swarm. And
Yeah.
I would assume a lot of people know what CTO is, but please define it for us. And what do you think the difference is for a fractional type of CTO?
Fractional CTO. Well, when we first started, right? I told this story a bit earlier today, and I kind of like went into an identity crisis when Dexter asked me to be CTO at Swarm. It's like mostly not because I was afraid per se. It was mostly like, what does that mean, right? What does being CTO at Swarm mean? And at that point, I still didn't know. I just dove in head first. But as we continued to do our thing, um, for me, it's enabling, right? At the end of the day, it's easy to tell other people, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. But I think, and even though I still do that, right? You would know, even though I still say those things, like, that's not my goal. My goal is not to limit. My goal is to enable. So whenever I have to say, I have to tell Dexter or you, hey, we can't do that, I always present another option, right? Hey, we can't do that because we don't have this. So if you can get me that, then we can do this, right? Or sometimes if that's like just not worth it or whatever, then a different way would be presented, right? Like my goal is to get us to where the company needs to be from a technology perspective. And sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you have to fight with your CTO or a CEO, sorry. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's been fun. It's been a good 2.5 years. And for me, it's really just about enabling and really not, because at the end of the day, you're there to help make this company successful, and enabling is, in my opinion, the best way to get there.
So you're an enabler for the people in the company and for us to achieve our goals, right? And that may be, it may come out in terms of a product vision or uh, like the business succeeding through profits, those kinds of things, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about the engineering part, right? Because
Okay.
there's engineering in a broad sense and architecture. Like,
Sure.
what do you think the differences are?
Well, I guess in the context of software, right? Or maybe if we just go back and just talk about what engineering is. Solving a problem, being able to solve a problem repeatedly or in a way that makes it easier, right? I think that's what engineering is. And that's a very rough description, but it's very different. For example, if you're building a chair, right? So a carpenter can build a chair, but if you engineer a chair, you make it so that you can build more chairs or maintain that chair like more easily, right? I think that's the difference. It's not just doing, it's like how do we make it so that in the future it's easier to build this again, or fix this share, right? I think that's what engineering is about. And for me, architecting, I always liken it to city planning, right? I always say that, and it's because for me, architecting is giving a certain place, like for example, plumbing happens in the bathroom, right? You sleep in the bedroom, so it's just kind of like putting things in places so that people know where they are, and they're organized in a way that makes sense, right? Yeah, and for software in general, I think that we always think that, so as an engineer, right, we don't always like talking to other people. But actually, I think that how your engineering organization communicates dictates a lot on, or reflects a lot on, in your code, in your actual code, right? So if, for example, you have one front end guy, if you have one front end engineer and one back end engineer, like typically, and they don't talk. Let's say they don't talk. They all just talk to like the project manager, or the designer or whatever. Um, if those two don't talk, they'll probably have separate repositories, or if they're in the same repo, they'll have separate folders. Like even their code won't talk to each other much, right? They'll probably just talk to each other when they need to. And in the same way, like that's why I think architecting is different from just solving the problem. It's solving the problem with the team that you have, with the resources you have, right? If my engineers like um, using Slack, right, we would have a lot of like internal notifications sent to Slack, because that's like where we do a lot of this commission. Exactly. It's Conway's law. I didn't just want to quote it. But yeah, that's it in my words. I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to solve a problem, but are we solving it effectively? Right. This is something that I always like ask myself.
All right. Thank you for that great intro on your views around architecture and engineering. And I think a lot of the beginner CTOs or lead engineers or newbie software architects will come
Mm.
across a very common question, right? Like, how do
Mhm.
you choose your tech stack? Or
Yes.
how do you determine what the tech stack is? Or what questions do you need to even ask
Yeah.
to determine the tech stack? What are
Yeah.
your views on that?
So I think I want to answer this question from a fractional perspective, right? Earlier I wasn't talking about anything fractional related, because like it's a bit generic, like what this is what engineering is, this is what architecture is. But as in a fractional perspective, you have to think about, so if I'm like working for a company, am I the primary decision maker for technology stuff? Like, am I the CTO, right? Am I like the primary responsible guy? If yes, and that means I'm gonna go out and hire engineers myself, it means that the architecture needs to reflect how I look at solving, the technical problems. If we're building a website, right, I would, for example, choose, well, does it make more sense to use Webflow, for example? If like, what's the point of building this with an engineer if a designer can do it faster and it's about the same anyway, right? So I would think about what the actual problem the company needs solving, and I wouldn't be closed off to like obviously like low code, no code tools, because at the end of the day, these are just evolutions, right? To be able to do the same things faster and easier. Um, but yeah, from a fractional perspective, it's really important to know what your role is first, right? How much power do you have? How much responsibility do you have? Because sometimes they'll ask you purely for technical, like oversight, and you have no say in terms of like who to hire, right? Sometimes you come in, you have an existing team, and in that scenario, for example, I would come in and talk to each engineer first, look at their code, try to get a feel of like how do they talk to each other, like what do they like doing, how do they code in general, right? Because it's always like the solution is always a bit custom to the context itself. Um, so going back to the question, how do we like? Sorry, what was the question again? Just to be clear.
Okay. how do you determine the tech stack? So I
Yeah,
think you're on to like understanding the context, and
yeah,
you're also describing it depends on how much power you
yeah,
wield
yeah,
coming in as a fractional
yeah.
person.
Yep, yep. Thank you for reminding me of where I should go next. Yes. So how did you? Because like everybody, every engineer, honestly, like asks each other like what your tech stack is, right? And we kind of like become cliquish in a way, subconsciously or consciously. It's like, oh, we use PHP too. Like I love PHP or whatever. I love Python, for example. We inadvertently become cliquish because of this, because of these technologies, right? Because you kind of like become part of this tribe, right? But at the end of the day, like technology, it's just a means to an end. Your customer doesn't care what tech stack you use, right? As engineers, we do care, and I do care a lot, right? But it's also related to who's actually going to build the software, right? Um, how much participation do I have in building the software? For example, if I'm the CTO or the architect, and like the team is an existing team with Go developers, and I don't know how to use Go. Well, I just need to know like how Go behaves, right? It's a statically compiled language, right? You can deploy it anywhere, etc. And like identify its strengths, right, compared to other languages, and be able to design a system like that suits it. I don't necessarily need to be the one coding. So you need to know like what the context is, and choosing the tech stack at the end of the day depends on what the company needs. Like, and sometimes like whenever I have this conversation with Dexter and Alexis, I have to turn off my engineering brain because they're gonna be like, "Well, we need this in 2 months, right?" But as an engineer, once people start talking about timelines, right, I'm gonna say, "Well, how am I gonna make that happen, right?" But in those conversations, that's not what you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about, well, what are the decisions we need to make now to enable this, right? If the timeline is, look, we need a landing page tomorrow, right? Why the hell will I code that, right? I would just buy
Why not?
templates. I would just use Webflow, right? Why? Why would I do it by hand? Um, there's just no reason. There's just no like benefit to doing that, right? Given the timeline as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, that choice you have to take into consideration evolution as well, right? Because where the company is right now will change over time, right? Maybe at this point we'll hire more people. We'll be able to hire more people, and so you have to think about that. And I think that's where architecture really comes in, right? Because how does your code evolve over time, and how do you structure it in a way that it allows itself to evolve, right? And it's not a very simple like problem to solve, but that's you have to give enough room for in your code, and you have to define like how you talk to each other, right? Just so that they can evolve independently as much as well, depending on what you
I
need.
guess there's a lot of like systems thinking, and you
For sure.
mentioned the word evolution, right? So, like I play City Skylines, and
Mm,
I view the I don't know, like I know the systems there.
yeah.
So you have to plan for. I mean, you can't just build for your tiny little hamlet village, right? Like you have to understand the future repercussions of your decisions
Mhm.
in at the present. Like, what's the future state of this? And I guess that's what architecting is basically.
Yep.
I'm a designer, so I don't know what that looks like
Yep.
on your
Well,
end.
that's exactly it, I think. And I think City Skylines is a good example or analogy because in real life, it's hard to remove your power plant in real life and move it somewhere else, right? But in City Skylines, you can just pause the game and move it, right? But I think it's very closely related to software because in software, well, we can do it behind the scenes and switch things up, right? And then release it, and people just don't need to know that we changed engines or whatever. But in hardware, that's like impossible, right? Because it's already
Hmm.
out. How do you do that, right? So I think the city planning, city skylines thing is a good analogy.
So, how about for founders, right? Like, what if you're a non-technical founder? How
Mhm.
do you know if you're hiring a competent, like, fractional CTO, or or at least like an architect, right? Like someone who understands these concepts. What kinds of
Um,
questions should they ask?
yeah, that's a good question. I think no matter what, you need a technical advisor, somebody who knows what's in the market. What I'm trying to say is, if you're trying to build an e-commerce product, what's the point of building all of that from scratch, right? But you, as a CEO or as a non-technical founder, maybe you don't know what's available out there in terms of technology, right? And that's fine. Like, you should get help. You should know what's out there. What do I need? What do we actually need to build, right? Because a lot of companies don't necessarily need to own their own tech. A lot of it is like just connecting these existing platforms, right, and making it available in a certain way so that people can more easily do something, right? So you have to think about, what are your actual needs? Is this something purely custom, right? Or is this something I can just buy? And if you don't know, then for sure you need a technical advisor who can help you do that. I would say you would need a full time CTO if you're sure that you're building a lot of custom code, especially to scale, right? Because some companies also have like plan to just throw away their current code base and rebuild anew. So you have to take that into consideration. Like, some startups like think about, well, if we build this and we get 1,000 users, we can raise $1 million, right? And next step, well, why do I need to take the old app? I can just build a new app, right? So maybe you don't need to hire a CTO in the beginning and just focus on building a great product or MVP to get that 1,000 users, right? So you have to be very specific about, well, do I need to pull the trigger and get a full-time technical guy, right? I would say deciding to hire a CTO and not just an advisor kind of role is it's when you need to build an organization around it, right, to support a very complex kind of software or platform behind it. So it's not always in the beginning. If you're a technical startup, meaning to say if your actual product is just software itself, well, obviously you need one. Um, yeah, but for most people, I think at least an advisor would be helpful.
I think you're talking a little bit about the trade-offs depending on the goal, right? So like
Yeah.
at what scope do you want to build? What costs are you willing to take on as a founder? And I think the most important thing is time or speed, because if you're a founder, you have limited runway. I mean, it's VC winter right now. You can't really get a lot of investment. So like, what do you do? What technologies do you use? I guess, Aaron, just based on what you're saying, right? Like, you take all of these things into account. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, for sure, time is always, for startups especially, right? For sure, time is always a sensitive issue. But again, going back to what I said earlier, like, evolution needs to be taken into consideration. If I build this sloppily right now, how hard will it be to replace this with a proper solution in the future, right? These kinds of thinking is what a CTO should be doing, in my opinion, right? Like, you need to think about, well, for example, in Swarm, like literally earlier, right? Dexter wants mentions, and I'm saying, well, I want mentions too, but how do we build mentions?
We
Like,
all want
yeah,
mentions.
we all want the features, of course, but like, sure, we can just hack up a quick, mentions kind of implementation, but will that lend itself well into integrating into a future rich text editor setup, right? Because, for example, in apps like YouTube, when you're commenting in YouTube, there's no rich text, but there's a way to mention other people, right? Or to reply to other people and stuff like that. So in that context, it's okay to like build a sloppy kind of like, just hacky way of mentioning people. That's fine. But if you know that this will eventually evolve into a full on rich text setup with markdown, commands, etc., um, you have to think about it. You have to look at your options. And it's hard to just think about it yourself as well. The way I work with my team is I sit down with them and I present them with options. And a lot of this honestly happens on the fly. I can't think of these things like just sitting on my desk. But once I'm talking with people about the problem and they're giving their inputs, it's easier for me to flesh it out and say, well, if we choose option A, like, we lose this. But if we choose option B, we lose this. So I think it just makes sense. We should just choose option B because blah 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 blah. Right? There's a path to evolution there. For example, um, yeah. At the end of the day, it really depends on your company's context, and time is always a big deal. Obviously, in startups, um, but sometimes it's worth delaying something because if it comes out and it's broken, then what's the point, right?
So how do you determine whether it's like a a build or buy decision?
Mm.
What are the
Uh,
intricacies of that for you in your mind?
how isolated? So whenever you mentioned earlier systems thinking, right? Um, that's something that comes naturally to me, and but whenever I start thinking about it, okay, when I think about systems, I always come back to like the body, like the human body, right? Central nervous system, et cetera, like blood, etc. But it's just a different. It's a series of different systems working together. But a buy or build kind of decision, you have to think about where is this in my system? Is this going to integrate perfectly with my stack, right? Like, or like for example, is this buy solution, does it have an SDK in my preferred language, right? Or if you don't have a preferred language, then maybe you can base that preferred language decision based on what SDKs are available, right? So it depends where you are, obviously, but I think the biggest thing is, does it help you in any way? What does it stop you from doing? If we decide to do this, what does it help me do? And if I don't do it, like what are the trade-offs, right? So it's always that kind of thing, and sometimes it's tiring. But what's been helpful to me, I think, is again being able to talk or work with my engineers who are specialists themselves. Like I have one backend guy, uh, one mobile app specialist, for example, and we have a couple of generalists on the team, right? So I talk with them one on one, and depending on the problem, obviously, but having their insight and say, well, you have to consider that. I have to remember that even if I want a specific solution, I'm not necessarily going to be the one who's going to build it. So I have to think about what they want, right? Or what they're comfortable with as well. Um, yeah, but sometimes you also have to like play a bit of games and convince them, especially if they're not sure, right? Like,
Persuasion
yes,
and some level of seduction. Oh, sorry, I got
uh,
that. So, Aaron, you were talking about people in the team understanding what they want, their own preferences.
mhm.
But even before you have an existing team, right? Like, how do you think about hiring? Like, how do you architect the team? Because they're the ones who will eventually, enable your grand
Yeah,
architecture, right?
yeah. So when we started Swarm, right? Um, it was clear that the organization needs to be built around me. And the reason why is because I'm the CTO and I'm going to make most of the decisions that don't have, anybody else who can make those decisions, right? And so I need to be able to work with people I'm comfortable with. And I need to hire people who fill in things that I'm not good at, right? If I'm coming into a team that's already existing, I need to find a way to find what's best for them and also think about, well, how can I position myself in such a way that I can help this team, right? And it's not always easy, obviously. It's not a zero sum game in the sense that sometimes some people need to go, sometimes it's not a good fit for you, sometimes it's, some of these hard decisions need to be made. But it depends on your person, it depends on people's personalities, obviously. And but at the end of the day, like, it's how do you like come together, how do you like problem solve together? I think that's central to me. If I find someone who's super good, right, like super good at one thing, I test and probe. But what about if you do something else? Like, how do you feel about that? Because I want to see how people like bend, you know, in different situations, right? Because during interviews, it's not just people aren't, especially in startups, right? It's not always just one thing that people are going to do. So once requirements start changing, how do people react, right? So in my
Are
team,
you a 10x engineer or not?
I mean, some people are, but only for specific things.
Mm,
Sometimes people refuse to do other things, or just they're just not good at them, or something like that, right? Um, you have At the end of the day, it's on me to create this environment where these engineers can thrive. So no matter how good somebody is, if they're not going to fit in inside, then what's the point, right? Especially in a startup perspective or in a fractional perspective where it's a mishmash of people, right?
mm.
There needs to be enough common ground so that you can move forward. This isn't like a full-on corporate company where there's a lot of processes that you just follow and things will just move forward, right? It doesn't matter if it's slow, it will move forward. In a startup, it needs to be like for example, I'm just not good at task management in terms of like, putting it on a piece of software and dragging stuff. But when I sit down with people, I can problem solve with them really well. So for me, that means I need to get people who can task manage themselves, right? Because if I task manage them, like I'm just not good at it. It just doesn't make sense. So I don't know, things like that. I think.
So that's part of our one of our core values, and definitely stems from you, uh, like obsession over the problem and collaboration. Um, what other qualities do you think are important when hiring
Hmm.
someone,
Um,
whether fractionally or not?
wait,
Honestly,
wait, as just in general, like,
for
uh,
for an engineering organization
oh,
that you handle.
so like, what am I looking for the most? I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I really people who are self motivated, people, or whether that's like related to software or not. I think people who find joy in something, who are excited to do something in life in general, and this is not even technical, right? Obviously, people need to be technical enough, but like, it's so much easier to work with someone who's passionate about something, who cares about something, right? Who loves to play badminton, let's say. At least you can share something that you guys like. Maybe I don't like badminton, but knowing that Alexis does, right, helps me know that we're driven in different ways, but we're both driven. And so I can help Alexa channel that energy sometimes into work. So, of course, people need to be technically capable enough, but it's hard to work with somebody, especially fractionally or remotely, if they're very like just flat, if there's nothing much that they want to do. It's hard to motivate other people, but it's easy to say, hey, let's play badminton tomorrow, let's finish this today, right? Because even though I don't love it, I still enjoy just feeding off of Alexis's energy whenever he goes out and does it, right?
So, when we talk about passion, like you're referring to my like love for badminton, right? Like, are you referring to outside work passions, or are you also talking about, let's say, hey, this person's super passionate about Flutter, or open source contributions, those kinds of things?
I think for me they're the same. It's just that I didn't want to put I don't want to put pressure on engineers and say that this is the only thing you can be passionate about, right? I would love to be a super active GitHub contributor, but I'm not. I have a lot of like things I want to build open source, but like I just don't have enough energy to do that and still do my real work. So I don't want to. I'm trying to avoid and say that, well, I only hire people who are passionate about programming. well, people can be passionate about different things and they're still passionate, as people. Um, but again, like at the end of the day, if they're not interested in coding at all, then what's the point? Obviously, there needs to be enough like desire to program there as well, right? But I just think passion is not just one thing. You can be passionate about a lot of things, and it translates sometimes. A lot of times, I would say.
It makes you. My opinion on this is, if you're passionate about something else, it also cascades to your work,
Yeah, yeah. It
and
bleeds
it
over.
makes you happier,
Yeah,
more productive, and makes you sharper as a
yeah,
overall. Um,
yeah.
Here's a question that I just thought of.
Sure.
Right, like, like, what's your? I don't know if this question is weird. Like, maybe if you remake Swarm or whatever, like, what's your dream tech stack now? Right, like if you're architecting something and you can remake it all over again.
Uh,
um,
Dream tech stack. I think we're using our dream tech stack. It's not a.
oh, why don't you walk us through like why
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a good dream tech
I'm
stack?
just thinking of how to introduce the whole tech stack. It's like there's a lot, right? It's like, oh no, not Azure, please.
PHP,
Uh,
PHP 2.
Literally, so we have an engineer named Terrence, right? And he just flew to Spain literally earlier today at 6 a.m. Or 4 a.m. Um, and we were talking yesterday, and we were like, yeah, in GCP, for example, you can organize like your infrastructure into projects. And in AWS, there's no projects. It's just regions. It's like crazy to me. I cannot think. I don't know how to organize my stuff without the projects thing. And I don't know if AWS has changed that, but it's been years since I last really got into it. Anyway, um, sorry, just to go back, what's my dream stack? I think we're pretty much using our dream stack. I think given the number of engineers that we have, we know that we want to keep certain pieces of technology like moving forward, for example. So we're on Firebase, right? We're building a mobile app. We're building a couple of web apps around it as well to support it. So we know that the backend needs to be like can support different front ends. So we know that the back end needs to not just be too biased in the mobile app itself, right? Um, and so because we're building mobile stuff, and because we want to give a lot of agency to our front end developers as well, so we're on Firebase, and a lot of our data is on Firestore, which is the NoSQL database on Firebase. Um, but the backend doesn't love it. Like Armando hates Firestore, like with a passion. Honestly, he hates it so much. But he knows that it's not for his benefit. It's for the benefit of the front end developers because it's so much easier for them to just connect their stuff because the data is just literally there and they can have access to it. Right? So we know that in the future for us, we're going to move away from Firestore. From the back, at least the back end primarily will move away from Firestore, but that we don't want to change how the front end is used to getting data from Firestore. So we're gonna like have a bait and switch kind of thing, where front end to Firestore remains, but back end will move to a different database. But we just have to make sure that the back end also just denormalizes data back to Firestore based on the data in the different database. Wow, that's so complicated.
I kind of understand. Like, I have an information systems degree,
Indeed.
but go ahead, please
But yeah, I think
continue.
that's it. May not be the current dream setup, right? Exactly right now, but it's what we need, given who we have as well, right? Once we scale, we can afford to like think about managing our own infrastructure. We can maybe be on Kubernetes, etc., etc. But for sure, not now because we just don't want to think about the infrastructure. We're mostly on serverless technologies, just so that we can just keep coding and not think too much about deployments and stuff. Yeah.
I think those kinds of things are essential for a designer like me. Like, when we suggest certain interaction models,
Mhm.
or have a preference towards a specific user experience. Um, if it takes a lot of time for engineering and there's a cascade of tech debt that can
Mhm.
occur, it's just generally hard. So having a great tech stack that's flexible and can allow us to experiment a lot
Yeah.
on the experience, that's so important for our organization.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I agree.
So yeah, go ahead. Go
Like,
ahead.
just talking a bit more about that. At the end of, sometimes my job is not just to keep the engineers happy, I guess. It's also to like find a way so that we can interface with the rest of the company effectively, right? So Dexter, Jiggy, and I, and a bit of Alexis as well, have been working a lot recently on like program management and making sure, because like sometimes it becomes the designers will come into a design mode and then throw over the wall, right? And engineers will be build mode, right? And that's fair, right? That's okay, especially a lot in the beginning. But you have to get into a different kind of perspective and think about the release mode or deploy mode, right? Um, is what we have on staging, is it releasable? Because what's the point of building new features if you're just gonna go into this spaghetti, right? That you can't release. So there's a time and place for these things, but if you have a normal release cycle, it's really important, because designers will stop like designing if there's like too many things that have already been designed, but none of them are getting built. Right? Right now, our designers are also helping us find like nitpick about the mobile app. Right? Hey, this doesn't work. Hey, this should work like this instead of this. But I was telling literally our mobile developers and our designers that look, we need to start fixing some of those things, because if we don't, the designers will stop checking because they will feel like that we're just ignoring them. Like they're not, we don't care about the help they're actually giving us. So at some point, you need to balance these things. It's communication both internally and also within your organization. So, but I guess that's less exciting. But yeah, sometimes it's part of the job.
So earlier you mentioned that you entered in some sort of an identity crisis,
Yes,
uh, moving
every
into a CTO role.
2:30 a.m. I think alarm.
when you're playing Baldur's Gate 3,
Yes.
trying not to think about work. um, what's been the biggest surprise for you so far? Just 2.5 years in as CTO.
Surprising in what sense? Just in general?
Yeah, like any amazing realizations for you stepping into the role, being a co-founder.
If I'm gonna be honest, it's less about being a co-founder or being a CTO or what I've learned occupationally. What I mean by that is like, so obviously I've grown, right? And learned so many new things like for the past 2.5 years that we've been doing Swarm. But rather than say that I've been, not that I haven't been enjoying that, right? But what I've been most surprised about is what we're doing more than the work part, right? But what Swarm is trying to do, I think I'm a lot more excited about that. And I say that because everyone in Swarm is fractional themselves, and we're doing it, right? We're working together fractionally. We're building stuff together. I tell Dexter that every day I wake up, sometimes I feel like it's becoming more and more true that what we're trying to do is really something special, and that everybody's just willing for it to happen, in one way. So I don't know if that's maybe a non-answer, but that's something I've been surprised about, because I think there were times, obviously, that I've been pessimistic about what we're trying to do, but more and more it just seems like we're building something that's worth it.
I think in relation to that sentiment, right? Like the best engineers would probably want to work at mission-driven companies too, or like at least in a vision they particularly care about, right?
Mm.
So what values do you have, Aaron, that made you want to do this, swarm thing in the first place?
What values? I I think it's easy for me to answer from a perspective that I don't think I am the average person, in the sense that I'm just I never quite fit in school, in primarily in school, I guess. Like I've never tried to get the highest grades. But that doesn't mean I hated learning. I just hated trying to get high scores. um,
Sorry, I just remember Aaron telling me before. He's like, "Oh, it's a math test.
yeah,
Okay, finish. Go to the computer shop."
it's,
Like straight. Sorry for
it's okay.
butting in. Like,
No,
you
like
continue.
yeah, I would always like get failing grades in other subjects, but maybe not math and science for some reason. Um, but it's not the education problem that I'm trying to solve, even though I do care about that. I think it's the people thrive in different environments problem, right? A lot of the times, look, work is so important to us in our lives. I mean, like more than half of your life, essentially, you're working. Uh, we spend so many years preparing for it in school, right? And when you get to work, it's like, this is it. Like, what's next, right? You don't know. You don't know what you're doing. Um, and what I hate the most is seeing people, or like me interpreting them as like feeling trapped in their jobs. Again, it goes back to that feeling of people thrive in different environments, right? So some people really like working in corporate jobs, etc. Some people thrive in startup situations, right? I care about people finding their place in this world, in work specifically. I guess in the context of Swarm, because I was gonna say life is work or work is life, but no, not that's not what I mean. Like, because it's so important to life. Like, work is so central to life, even though it's not the most important thing, but it's pretty important, right? And not being happy in work is such a sad idea to me, right? Like, I don't care about not being happy at school because at least you get out of it. But in work, it's like forever until whenever, right? So I think fractional is the evolution of work. It's not gonna change everything, but it's gonna change a lot of things. Yeah.
All right, those are a lot of those are like very very quotable quotes. But yes, everyone in the audience, we do believe that um, we value freedom, autonomy, and taking ownership of what work should look like in your own view, following your own values and what makes you happy, right? And we're creating the infrastructure and the platform to make that happen. We want to disrupt all companies.
What?
Yes.
All your money. I'm just kidding. Not all of it.
Okay,
Just part
so
of it.
we have like 28, 27, almost 30 people in the chat.
Mm,
We'd love to get your questions if you have any
yeah.
for the last 15 minutes.
If
Otherwise,
you don't have
we're
questions,
moving
guys,
on.
can you just paste, or can you just type what your tech stacks are?
Yeah, go
That's
ahead, go
fine.
ahead. And then you judge it, Aaron.
I judge it. No.
Japto Tech Stack. What's that? Is that
Uh,
real?
Jepto is a company.
Okay. Why is it? Why should it be funny? Like, please explain to a designer.
Uh, well, I don't remember what the context of that is. My
My
stack
stack
is
is
whatever.
whatever based.
Like,
Great answer.
see, that's a good answer. Like, no, honestly, right? That's a good answer. If that's what I need to do, I will do it.
I mean, where's the lie?
I remember getting a call from Canva. And they were like, "Hey, can you please apply to this job position?" I was like, "Whoa, what programming language do you use?" And they're like, "Oh, we're building blah blah blah. We're using Java." I was like, "Okay, thank you."
Thank you.
It's just
Nice
because I
call.
prefer not to. But if I went
Okay.
hungry, I probably would.
I mean, the freedom to choose the tech stack. Like, how does that feel? Because like when we were working together at Kalibrr, like you were going into it right with an
With an existing,
existing one.
yeah, I never truly hated like Calibre setup. It was just harder to work with, obviously because I didn't build it and stuff. But not just that. It's just there were a lot of us. There were a lot of engineers trying to work on the same code base, and a lot of moving parts, and without like really well defined boundaries between parts of the code, it's hard to scale that or move fast with that kind of a complexity, I guess.
Yes, getting to Series B.
I wouldn't even say that I had that like choosing. It's not the choosing my stack kind of thing that's fun or that makes me happy. It's knowing that I know how to evolve my stack that makes me happy. Like it just planning for that inevitability of scaling, right? Inevitability of having to pay more for servers because we need more server capacity, whatever. But if you just click a button and it happens, like that's what makes me happy. Not the choice,
I saw
right?
this. I saw this tool from Thinking Machines. I think they had
Hmm.
a server cost calculator thing for their
Okay,
clients. I thought that was really cool. Like you can drag and drop. I don't know what that is, but like, okay, so this is how engineers think. Like,
it's math.
eventually you'll have to like think about lowering the expenses, lowering the costs, and making great trade offs. Um,
Yeah,
well, if you have millions of users.
yeah. So I think that's just it, right? I'm not against. Well, earlier I said I use a lot of serverless tech, but that's not a strong opinion because like using traditional servers will probably be faster, but they just cost more. So at a certain point, it will make more sense to use actual servers. Just maybe not now, right? So it's always an evolution kind of thing. How do you keep yourself updated with the latest technologies? You have to subscribe to Alexis Collado at. Just kidding. Um, I
What?
honestly like Fireship. I don't know. A lot of developers probably know what Fireship is, but that YouTube channel is like doing a lot of the heavy lifting, to be honest, with keeping me updated with what's happening uh, while playing games. Like honestly, Fireship, he's so good, and he's like he always says it in a funny way, right? But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the tech it's recursive, right? We reinvent the wheel in a lot of ways, but fundamentally they're all the same. Um, so it's more like and don't get me wrong, you don't necessarily need to know everything in the sense that you know how to use everything in Azure, everything in AWS, everything in GCP. Sometimes specializing is fine, right? I'm more of a GCP guy. And the reason that how I made that choice is because when I look at the pricing and GCP is cheaper. And there are a lot of like networking costs are free, for example. So it's not that I hate AWS. It's just that there are some things that I think it makes more sense to be on GCP in general because there's no networking costs, for example. And overall, it's cheaper. And yeah, I don't really have a problem with their products so much. So I've been happy with GCP. So like choosing technologies, like sometimes you just stumble upon them, but it's hard. I honestly, so this guy, so Francis was asking, how do you keep yourself updated? For front end stuff, I always just ask Francis. Hey Francis, is there something new? Should I be using Spelt or should I be using something else, right? So yeah, sometimes I can't do everything myself. I just ask other people.
there's someone in the organizations who's always like updated. um,
Yeah.
and then like you just pull uh, the strongly held opinions and the preferences, I guess. So here's a question from me, Aaron. Um, I'm not sure how related this is, but it's the age of AI.
Hmm.
How do you evolve from there? Like if you're an architect,
How do you
do you
evolve
have
from there?
yeah, like how are you thinking about um evolving now that this is the new context?
I think I think there are things that AI will be super good at doing. Okay, actually, let's be clear. There are a lot of things that only AI can do well, like super well. Like for example, image pattern recognition, right? Like if they're given an image, how do you find the outline? How do you find blah blah blah? So there are things like that for sure AI will be just the only solution, right? But there are also a lot of things that normally we would do as engineers or as designers, etc. But AI will now also be able to do faster, better, etc. At the end of the day, where your customer doesn't care what you use, at the end of the day, it's just another evolution in terms of the tools that we use, right? So we use GitHub Copilot, for example, in Swarm. I don't have a lot of use for it, but the rest of the engineers are super happy with it because it helps them move faster. It helps them it autofills. Like Terrence would say, sometimes I would type something and I would just wait, and he's like, "Come on, AI, do it for me." Literally,
This is how you become a fractional
yeah,
engineer.
he would wait because sometimes it's the network, right? Sometimes it's like it's loading, so you're like, okay, but wait, it's been like 10 seconds, it's still not there. Come on, do it. At the end of the day, it's just another. Right now, at least, it's just another piece of tooling. Eventually, there will be a Webflow kind of tool that will do a lot of the things just automatically. But I think these things, it's not going to be as fast as we think, except for those things like natural language processing, right? The things that AI is already good at. I think those are up for grabs for sure in the short term. How do you evaluate whether it's worth learning a new tool or framework you've discovered or using them for a client? That's a good question, actually. So there's this new tool that we're using to answer this question. There's this new tool that's really cool that we're using. It's called Temporal, which I will paste here. It's a bit. I guess it's. So that's the thing, right? We've only been using it for 3 weeks, I think. It took us maybe 2 days to decide to try it out. It it's the easiest way for me to say or to explain what temporal is. It's a replacement for Celery, Rabbit MQ, but it's cross like it can you can use whatever language you want. Um, but it's been super good. How did we evaluate? Um, how do we decide to use to use this tool? Right. So Terrence and I we built an MVP for our asynchronous workloads, like for sending emails, etc. We built an MVP. It was working. We were fine with it. We were pretty happy with it. But then we started talking about, okay, let's do advanced features, right? Let's do rate limiting. Let's do like batched kind of delayed stuff, and with retries and magical blah blah blah. And at the end of the day, Terrence and I were like, yeah, we can build all of that, but we don't need to. We can just like look for something. Hey, maybe this tool solves this problem. I don't even remember where I found temporal. I think I just googled it somehow, and it just showed up, and I just clicked it because it sounded nice. It's been super helpful. We can sleep better at night because of temporal, because there are guarantees there that your task will run, etc. But how do I like? But I don't know if I'm answering your question, Rafi, that well. But
He Aaron said it sounds nice. That's the main criteria.
something sounds nice. I mean, I don't know. We did a lot of due diligence. Like Terrence literally read the whole documentation thing, but I let him do that. Right? We were like, hey, we can spend 2 days looking into this new tool. Is it worth it? We'll figure out in 2 days, right? If it's not worth it, we'll stop. We'll just build it on top of what we're already using. So I think you just have to be pragmatic about it and like time box it reasonably. For example, Armando right now is like very concerned about our unit tests. So I think I'm giving him a bit of time to research on his own, and I think I'll look through other things as well. And when we converge again, it's that time when we need to make a decision on what to do. So, but I work with Armando in a way that, hey, yes, we need to refactor our tests because it's become so painful to maintain them, but let's finish these features first. And for Armando, at least, it motivates him and makes him move faster. And when he finishes all those things, then we can research those things that he is passionate about fixing, right? So, yeah, I think that's a better answer for Rafi. Anyway, how do you decide between building a tool in-house or leveraging it? Third party. Yeah, mostly like how will that third party solution will fit in my tech stack, right? If it fits perfectly, why not? If it's too expensive, then why at all, right? I look at how much it costs, how seamlessly it will integrate with the stack, and yeah, it's just as simple as that. I would say. For example, I guess a good example is we tried out Pulumi, which is a Terraform competitor, and we were happy with it to begin with. But once our use cases started becoming more complex, it took too much time for us to or effort from us as well to port over some of Terraform's providers over to Pulumi. So at the end of the day, we were like, let's just rewrite everything in Terraform. I think that's probably faster. We just try things. Sometimes you have to take a bet, and just know like what you would lose if this bet would fail, right? You just have to keep that in mind. And if that's too high of a price to pay, it's probably not worth trying.
Take calculated risks.
Yeah. Why don't we just vectorize our code base and just do create unit tests for everything prompt? So I been talking to like my co-founder about this a bit, like when she was still here. I was telling her right now AI will integrate with our tools in a way that it's auto-filling, right? GitHub Copilot is creating like auto-filling, right? Our code, right? But in the future, AI can just write its own programming language that's fit for AI, right? That's in vectors and stuff. So you as a developer, you don't even need to like look at code itself. You just need to tell the AI, I need this to happen. It'll just know what to do.
Our co-founder Sabrina,
Yeah.
she's at OpenAI
Yes.
right now.
Indeed.
So yes,
Yeah.
that's going to be we will keep you updated with like AI events too in the
Yeah.
future.
Honestly, super excited for those things. Yeah, but I think I just want to get the mobile app out first. But
Any more questions for people? Oh, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I know Francis was sharing this tool, Codium. I think we looked at it. I think it's tied to a specific language, if I remember. That's why we didn't end up using it. But I wanted to use it for testing. I think Codium is for testing, right, Francis? Your non-trivial tests and trivial too. Straight in your ID. I think there's a limitation in terms of like what language it supports. And that's why we didn't end up using it. But we wanted to try it as well. Diablo 4 or Baldur's Gate? Baldur's Gate for sure.
The ultimate question.
Yes. It just makes me happy.
Diablo messed up. That's it. That's the one.
They started out strong, but that's about it. Anyway, Karlak or Starion, why did you romance Shadowheart? I romanced Shadowheart because I knew I needed, as the Dark Urge, I needed to kill a companion.
Please no spoilers.
Whoops. Sorry.
For the console players.
Yeah. Anyway, this was fun. Thanks for this, Alexis.
You're welcome. And to everyone in the audience who's still here. Aaron, you're super popular. We have like 100 people here. We have another CTO related talk next week uh, with Jay Fajardo. So Jay is a CTO of a lot of companies. He also managed, I think, a venture fund, National Garage. Um, so he's like a co-founder in Medify, Proud Cloud, and Launch Garage. So he's one of the pioneers in the Philippine tech startup ecosystem. All right, and if you have more CTOs or topics you want to, talk about, just message anyone from the Swarm team, and we will take you very seriously.
Yeah, for sure.
Any parting words, Aaron?
I think there are a couple of interesting opportunities. We're looking for a lead developer for a backend Python project. So if anybody's interested, what was the other one, Jake? Do you remember?
We need a B2B AI startup is looking for a lead backend engineer and machine learning engineer. So let me just
Oh
drop
yeah,
the
so two people, one like lead backend engineer and one like AI. I think it was ML ops specifically, machine learning ops. So if you like building, if you like automating a lot of the AI pipeline stuff, it's probably a good opportunity. And I think it's a US based startup as well. So money's probably there. Just letting you guys know if you're interested. Anyway,
Yes, the tech stack where you can pay your rent.
no, really, like this is Will. Literally, what Will was saying, right? My tech stack is what pays my bills. And
Exactly.
yeah, I think we're if you guys have if you're not interested yourself, you can also refer other people. I think there's a pretty big percentage for the referral fee. So yeah, just encouraging everyone.
2% of the contract value.
I think it was bigger than that for this one specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take a look at the opportunity, everyone.
Yes, I am
Thank
ready.
you so much for attending. We're so happy to be chatting with all of you. And please join us for the future events. We have a Swarm Salon every Thursday. So, we can just chill every Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.